Welcome to the season finale of Krown Countdown U. I'm Ryan Sullivan. He, of course, is Andrew Wadden. Fear not, as we are taking a summer hiatus and will be back soon enough on your television and various devices in August when non-conference action starts to roll. Now, Andrew, we do have a bit of a different format for the closer.
Well, Ryan, for the dedicated group of us that follow Canadian college football, it has been one of the most active off seasons in recent memory. And one of the reasons for that is the CIS Football Task Force. They're meeting this week. Of course, the lone coach's representative on the task force is Carleton's Steve Sumara.
To be blunt, the one thing I said I'm a coach, I'm not an administrator, and I want things done. I don't want us to sit here and talk for 20 hours and accomplish nothing. Like, I think we need to get moving, and the group was I think appreciative of the fact that the CIS can be a policy-driven organization, and as coaches, we don't think like that. We're in the now, and hopefully they'll understand that, and we can get some of these ideas that are on the table moving forward.
Throughout most of the football nation, there are haves, have-nots, and some in-betweens. Part of the reason for that is that there are 4 different conferences doing business in a number of different ways. Here's what the coaches had to say about that.
First of all, have a level playing field. I think, there are some significant differences in the way the 4 conferences do business.
The first thing is we need to level the playing field. And there's a lot of areas like that. When you look at the differences between the Quebec conferences and the Maritimes and the Ontario and Canada West, there are differences that do influence success.
So there's a call from many outside of Quebec for national standards to equally apply to all the conferences. The recruiting arms race is at the forefront of this discussion, limiting a number of times a player can visit a school, a recruiting calendar, and coaches just being able to have a life. Those are at the top of the list.
Recruiting regulations are something that I think that's coming forward in the CIS Football Summit that I absolutely believe as a young head coach with a young family, we need to absolutely address. In my world, I was speaking to Blake Nill about it last night. I don't see why we couldn't have a 1-week blackout for every month of the 12 months of the year. If you can't get your recruiting work done in three weeks of a month, then I guess you're not being efficient enough with what you're doing. I think we need to also have lives outside of coaching.
I would like to see a more structured, mandated recruiting platform put in place. And I was part of a group of 4 coaches or 5 coaches who met earlier this spring in Toronto to provide an outline for that.
Unfortunately, in our country, I think with the distance and the perspective that evolves from that, we have many different views for how things should go. So hopefully it's a challenge for leadership, to do what's best for the sport, to do what's best for the kids, do what's best for, developing the leaders of tomorrow. So I'm optimistic, but I realize we have our challenges.
Interlocking games was also a prime issue for the coaches. Whether it was on a regional scale or a national scale, broader competition would seem to be important to the majority of the bench bosses. Mount Allison's Kelly Jeffrey would like to see the AUS RCQ interlock renewed, while coaches elsewhere talked about the importance of a national footprint.
It's imperative. We really need it as a AUS. It makes football stronger on the East Coast for sure. I think it helps with the branding of the game on a national level and certainly regional. And so, I really kind of enjoyed when we had 2 interlock games in the past, and now that we just have 1, I still very much appreciate it and think, like I said, it's an imperative for us. And so I think it adds a lot to the game also. And as our conference gets stronger and does better in those games, I think we're going to help show the value of the game to the Quebec Conference as well.
I think there are things that allow some of the struggling teams, that's not a good word, but to use that, interlock scheduling and step forward, put themselves into better positions against more equal opponents to create some wins for themselves and change their perspective and their image. So again, I think it's close. I think it could be a year away.
Well, there's lots of talk, obviously, about interlock, national interlock. That's one of the things, and I think it's gone from the Northern 8 that you guys are involved with to even expanding the national playoff scene to adding more teams. I think there's some great thoughts around that. I like to see us continue to pursue that.
Part of the frustration in the football community is the lack of marketing and exposure for an entertaining product, which has come of age over the last decade. While coaches are not marketers by trade, they would like to see the value of the game and the management of the events take center stage.
But definitely we'd like to see a great deal of more support in terms of the media, in terms of television coverage, that type of thing. Our brand of football is great. It's been great for many years, and I think we just looking for that fan base to really expand.
I'd like to recognize there are coaches out here and programs who are starting to see the value of what a CIS football program can bring the school. You know, when I left Calgary, we were the #1 print media and TV media story at U of C. And that's something that all CIS programs can attain to, and you know, like if you being a native of Vancouver, you've seen how much press we've been able to generate here, how much recognition. I think what you have now in terms of the coaches, some of the administrators that are running CIS programs, is a willingness to work hard to attain and profile what I think is the flagship program, flagship sport in CIS, and I just want to make sure that we rally around that cry and realize that what we're doing is a positive for the university experience in Canada.
I think we need to expand our brand. I think we need to show who we are and increase our ability to compete. And that means national. That means national interlock. Would love to see it in however it begins, in any way, shape, or form that allows us to go national, and different competition, different venues, all of the above. It increases the student athlete experience. It increases the branding of your product. The public awareness, and gives us a chance to back up what we're bragging about.
All right, so now we've heard from the coaches on the burning questions for the future of the game, Ryan. Now it's time to wrangle that round table.
You'd like that, wouldn't you?
I'd love to see it.
It's in the script. That's what we're doing next. It's the round table. We are talking future of the game you're watching. Krown Countdown U.
Krown Produce secures produce locally and from around the world for Canadian retailers. Krown Produce is also proud to secure sponsorship of University football on Shaw. Krown Produce, supporting Canadian retailers and Canadian amateur football.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Krown Countdown U. It's time again for the round table portion. We've got Jim Mullen joining us on the far side, Gord Randall in the middle as always, and joining us live from Calgary, we have CIS commentator, analyst, he's the hybrid, he does it all. It's Mr. Jesse Lumsden. Welcome to the show, Jesse.
Pleasure to be a part. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you, buddy. All right, now the big news, of course, we could see some changes in football moving forward. The task force is meeting. Now, they were put together earlier in February. They consist of 4 conference heads, president of the OUA, head of the Coaches Association, and a chairperson. And they are covering a whole whack of topics. We got recruiting rules, roster sizes, expanded national playoffs. They're discussing the interlock, of course, along with some team spending. Guys, what do you hope to see out of this? Let's start with Jim.
Well, I hope to see a wider group actually participate in this. I think it's positive that there is going to be a meeting with all of the coaches and all of the ADs this week in Ottawa. I hope there's more action than talk when it comes to a number of the issues that are in front of them. The CFL is an observer at this meeting. Really, I think the CFL should be a participant. It's highly unfortunate that Football Canada was not invited to any of these discussions. I think it's critical that they're involved in this, and even the Canadian Football League Players Association. They may be trying to take too much of a big bite here. I know marketing is on their agenda. Athletic directors are very good at what they do in terms of managing money and managing expectations, but they're not trained at marketing. There needs to be some expertise from that field, I think, brought into this discussion to make it a worthwhile discussion and get it to the proper conclusion that it needs.
Gordon in the middle.
What I think needs to come out of this is I think that there needs to be a cogent action plan that focuses on the on-field product instead of worrying too much about the off-field product at this point in time. And I think that if the on-field product, they clean up some things, they even the playing field on recruiting, and they find more ways to increase the exposure of our athletes and our game, that's going to really put this in the right direction. The other thing that I would like to see come out of this, and I think that the fact that this task force even exists, is already a step in the right direction there, and that's the admission that football is more than just another varsity sport. And I think we're going to talk a little later about the differences between how the coaches approach this issue and how athletic directors approach this issue. The problem with athletic directors, from my view, is that they see football as another sport. It's like it's one of their sports. They don't see it as what we see it as, where it's this unparalleled revenue sport in terms of its potential to earn the university some money and to increase the university's exposure. And it needs its own unique treatment for that reason.
Jesse, out to you.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys on certain aspects. Unfortunately, the CIS won't be, or probably will never be, the revenue generator that the NCAA is. Just because of this sheer size and population. But I agree with you. It is definitely a focal point in collegiate sport. It is next probably, I'd be interested to see the numbers against CIS basketball. But, in terms of popularity, those are going to be your top two. The task force, which I love the name for, right next to the Avengers and Justice League, need to have their own movie coming out soon. But, biting off more than you can chew, like Jim said, you can spread yourself thin and then you really get nothing accomplished. And it is too bad that, CIS football needs to reach out, and bringing in guys from the PA and the CFL and Football Canada it's assets. And I don't understand why you wouldn't use those assets to improve your own product.
Yeah, and so we have to ask the question, is this a task force or is this just a competition committee? Because if it's the same voices in the room that have got them to this point, it just looks like a competition committee to me. And with several of the individuals who are sitting around the table, I think one of the things that they've got to steer clear of is just speaking up in their own interest. They have to go into the task force with their eyes wide open and focused on the national interest of the game. And when you don't reach outside of your own sphere, I'm not sure if that indication is there.
But when it comes to parity across the league, what would you guys like to see happen? Would you like to see it stay the same? Let's go to Gordon in the middle.
Well, it was certainly a breath of fresh air to see 3 of 4 national semifinalists this year change over. And that was the first time in a while that we'd seen what appeared to be a bit of a changing of the guard. And the structure of the CIS right now is it's kind of turned into an arms race where whoever has the money to put a top program on the field will do so. This is the model that UBC is now following with its big change this year. But what I would like to see is I would like to see them not focus on restraining the top teams for parity, but focus on how to build up the bottom teams. And I think that you build up the bottom teams by increasing coaching, training different coaches, giving them maybe some extra grants or some sort of fund for recruiting, helping them increase their reach by ways that don't involve telling the Lavals of the world, hey, you can't do this. Even though you can, we're not going to let you because that's not really fair to the Concordias of the world because they're just kind of not there yet.
Jim.
Well, I think it comes down to a couple of things. It's reach, recruit, and rally alumni. These are, I guess, the new 3 R's for any program out there. I think Waterloo has done this. I think York has done this, especially in terms of recruiting and using Kamal Peterson to reach out into Alberta. UBC has done it in terms of rallying alumni. These are all schools that you could actually say were on the bottom tier, and they're doing something about it. So maybe in terms of working through a natural cycle and having schools place that priority on these programs, or letting people from the outside help them place the priority on those programs, is the best way to reach parity.
One thing I wouldn't mind having put in is a limit on coaching salaries. And I know that any coaches who are paying attention to this out there will balk at that because they do a heck of a lot of work. But if you can limit coaching salaries and make it a little bit more even across the board, then potentially you can end up with some top flight coaches at some of these smaller universities. But we've seen Blake Nill being an example of a guy that started a smaller school and then moved to a bigger school and now has moved to an even bigger school. Not necessarily entirely in search of a paycheck, but that's certainly been a factor. I'm sure he'd admit. I think that would be one thing. And we can't just treat this like the NC2A where we can just say, look, the big fish can swim and the little fish can drown. Because the fact of the matter is the NC2A has tiers based on school size. And we don't here. Mount Allison is not going to have any of those 3 R's that you just said that would match what UBC has or what Western has or anything like that. So there does need to be some sort of an action plan. We can't just let things continue on as they are.
I think Mount Allison has a pretty strong community that they can tap into, even though they don't have the numbers. I think they have a strong alumni that's well networked that they can tap into, even though they don't necessarily have the numbers. And in terms of limiting what a coach can make, I mean, if you take a look at the UBC situation right now with Blake Nill and the amount of money that they're spending on him and Steve Barato, they've had a bit of an issue trying to pull in other coaches onto that staff to build a staff like you see in Montreal or you see in Laval with the numbers that are more equitably distributed across the board. So maybe the market takes care of that a little bit.
Jesse, out to you.
Spending money also promotes a better product. So if you can find a way to get that better product out on the field and showcase that in the schools, it'll eventually spread across. But yeah, you're right. Mount Allison is a little fish in a big pond, but great community presence, and they had a great on-field presence and performance, and they were shown nationally, and that will help more than anything else.
All right, now, as mentioned, a huge thing that obviously comes along with parity is recruiting. I mean, any league, any sport you look at, recruiting is absolutely massive, and they're going to cover the recruiting rules in this task force discussion. Now, how do you enforce them? Will there be a visit window, a time limit? What sort of things are they going to touch on, and what would you like to see? Let's start things out with Jesse in Calgary.
To be honest with you, I have no idea how you would be able to limit that, other than the only thing I remember going through my recruiting process was when I touched very briefly on the NCAA was you have a certain amount of official visits to schools. And I think that is a great way to handle that, but you have to have equal playing fields in terms of scholarships across the board for that case, because if you're not going to allow people to go to certain schools, you have to look at it from an education standpoint as well, and you're limiting them from going to see a post-secondary education institute instead of just a football program.
All right, Jim.
Well, I think the thing that they can do is pass the hat around and hire a compliance officer. Combine the compliance officer with a calendar to work with that rotates through the 4 areas of the country so that certain times of the year you can't recruit in Quebec or you can't recruit in Ontario. There are a number of coaches out there right now that, in addition to coaching, are working about 49 to 50 weeks of the year. I saw Bertoya, for example, when he was an assistant, always on the road. Kevin McNeil is another guy at Guelph. Brian Doby is always on the road. These guys need to have lives. These guys need to have balance. Obviously they're working towards wins and losses, but a little work-life balance in the world of CIS football is actually a pretty good thing.
Well, and another thing that might play towards your point there is the establishment of a travel fund or travel restrictions at the very least. And that means both for bringing recruits in and for coaches going out. And I think if you can make that pool a little bit more equitable, then you can make out-of-town recruiting more equitable. And a lot of universities, I think, would go for that idea because it encourages you to recruit well within your own market. And that's something that we've seen with the prairie schools that they really emphasize. And I think a lot of schools, if you ask them, would say, well, we'd love to have our own hometown be our territory. Build a wall around Quebec City. That's been Laval's philosophy for a while. I think a lot of schools would like to do that. And if you even out the travel playing field, like again, back to my own experience, I kind of saw it firsthand. I took trips to Queens and St. FX, and St. FX piggybacked on Queens' trip to save themselves some money. And Queens, on the other hand, flew me out to Kingston on a private jet. Now, that's a stark contrast, and ultimately, it probably did tip the scales in Queen's favor for me.
Now that you're on Krown Countdown, those days in your private jet, those are over. I'm sorry. You will ride coach with the rest of us from here
I know,
on out.
we don't all make the kind of money that Jim does on this show.
All right, let's touch on the 8-team national playoff. Another idea that's been kicked around a little bit. Now, how would you go about the rankings for this? Because there's always talk about the CIS top 10, how you come about those rankings. But also at the same time, would this take away most of, if not all the importance of the national games? You got the Yates, the Hardy, the Mitchell, the Dunsmore. What are your thoughts on this, Jim?
Well, personally, I'm not a fan of this, and because I think it takes away from the importance of the conference championship game. I think we've seen it with basketball in the CIS, where a conference championship game really doesn't mean a whole lot at the end of the day, because you know both those teams in that championship game, maybe with another consolation winner, are going through to a national tournament. The other challenge that I see is if a broadcaster like Sportsnet is already unwilling to broadcast a game like the Yates Cup, are they going to add 4 games in one day to one of their stations? I literally don't see that happening. Maybe there's smarter minds out there than me that do see that happening, but I don't see where the fit is. With something like that. If you look at the AUS, one of the reasons that they've just sold their rights for their sports away to another telco for $1.7 million is because they built up equity in the Loney Bowl. The OUA, with their previous administration, did an outstanding job of rebuilding the Yates Cup into a brand that had some worth to it. And they've drawn sponsors in as a result of that. Why you would throw that under the bus in the name of a national tournament is beyond me. And I know one of the big complaints from the ADs is that they are of the mind that the best teams don't make it through to the Vanier Cup. Well, if you take a look at the last 4 Vanier Cups, I think we've had the 2 best teams in each of them, and we've had some very close and competitive games. That have drawn a fair number of eyes to them. So I don't know where that argument comes in unless you're in the OUA and you see that you have 11 teams and you think that just based upon the number of teams that you have, you deserve to have more than one entry into the national playoffs.
But on the other hand, when you're in the OUA, you're part of the people that chose to have an Ontario-only conference. Let's not forget that we used to have an OUA that consisted of Western Ontario and then an RSEQ that reached into Quebec and included Eastern Ontario as well. But the OUA and what's now the RSEQ decided that they wanted to have their own provincial entities. And that's what you risk doing by expanding the playoffs here, is you risk taking the importance out of the Ontario Championship, the Quebec Championship, the Atlantic Canada Championship, the Canada West Championship. I'm a little bit softer on the issue than you, Jim, in that I do very much see where the concerns come from here, and I understand them, and I think there may be something that we can do that would work. One thing I would propose is a potential 16 system where you have a wild card system where the actual conference champions get an advantage over the other teams that get into the draw. And so in a year like this, maybe Laval does get another crack, but they're at a slight disadvantage because they didn't win their own conference. Potentially, that's a possible scenario. I mean, right now, you get a lot of teams where they come out at the beginning of the year and their main priority is to win their conference championship. And I guess it all depends on your personal view as to whether you think that's a good thing or not. Because it's great that that conference championship is such a big deal. And I mean, when I was playing in the Canada West, it was always the Hardy Cup that we were looking for. When I was playing in the OUA, it was the Yates Cup we were looking for. And when I was lucky enough to go beyond that, it felt like gravy the entire time.
Mm-hmm. It's a bonus round.
And certainly we played like we wanted to win the games, but at the same time, like, we'd accomplished the big one.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you see that as a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know that I see that as a great thing if you want to promote the national championship as a big deal. Yeah, well said. Jesse, out to you.
I'm for conference championships. The idea of winning the Yates Cup is an entry into the next level.
And you know, the one thing that's really interesting in all of this is when you take a look at that questionnaire, it's the one area where the coaches are almost split down the middle, is on this 8-team national playoff. Everyone is in one camp or another on all these other issues, but the coaches are split, and I think that they also see the value of having a value to the conference championship.
All right, now we've talked about what we're excited about in a boardroom. Sorry to cut you off the record.
That's all right.
Now let's talk about what we're excited about on the field, actually going down in 2015, the next season to come. We're going to start with my friend in the middle, Gord Randall, after I just cut you off.
Thank you very much. What I'm excited for, and we've talked about it a bit in this episode, talking about how to increase the parity in the CIS, what I'm excited for is a continuation of the changing of the guard that we saw starting last year. And all of a sudden last year, like we've alluded to previously, we saw 3 of the 4 national semifinalists change over, and all of a sudden this year, you can still see that shift of power occurring in the conferences. Lots been talked about what's been going on out here in the Canada West, and in particular here in Vancouver. York went into Alberta and got some big-time recruits out of there. It looks like they may be finally figuring it out. There's a changing of the guard in Quebec, where Concordia had a strong year last year after a lot of years as a doormat, and all of a sudden Laval's not the creme de la creme anymore that they once were. It's going to be very, very interesting on the field.
There you go, Jesse, out to you.
Changing the guard, it's awesome. It's exciting to see. Out west here, I mean, we all were apart and saw what happened with Nil leaving Calgary quite late, and the controversy of possibly losing a huge recruiting class and the effects that can have on a program for a long period of time. Now we don't know. We will wait and see what kind of product they put on the field. They do have a veteran team, lost a couple guys as seniors, but there's definitely it's. That whole map has changed. The queue has changed. Ontario, go Mac. No big deal. To be honest, I'm just excited to start being a part of some football again.
Jim, take us home.
Canada West. I can't remember the stage being set better for a Canada West season since the early 1980s. And yes, that's how long I've been around for in all of this. Any of the 6 teams, I think, are actually capable of going on a run and doing some damage. Even Regina with the changing of the guard there. Who knows what Mike Gibson has in store as the head coach of the Regina Rams. Alberta had the 2nd or 3rd best recruiting class in the country, depending on who you talk to. Obviously, there's changes at UBC, and people should be excited about Michael O'Connor. Calgary comes back probably with the best team on paper. Saskatchewan is completely solid. Every week is going to be a dogfight in the Canada West. And I'm not just saying that because I'm plugging the Canada West games that we're going to be doing come August and September. I'm saying that because I am genuinely excited about what we could see out of this conference this year.
For all of us here at Krown Count NU, Jesse, thank you so much for joining us all year long, my friend. Enjoy your summer, your time off. We'll see you again in a few months. For Jim Mullen on the far side, Gord Randall in the middle, Andrew Wadden earlier in the show, I'm Ryan Sullivan. Thank you to the man that keeps this going, David Dubé and the Dubé family out in Saskatchewan. There it is. True West Coaster. I'm Ryan Sullivan. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch you in a couple months.